One, the lantern on the dresser was burning low, the kind of orange that turns everything in a room the color of old honey. I could hear his boots on the kitchen floor downstairs. 1, 2, 3, 4. I counted because counting was the only thing my hands could do under the quilt. My prayer cap ribbons were still tied. I had not loosened them. That was the choice I made before I knew it was a choice, and I did not know yet, not really, that saying no a second time was a door. And that on the other side of that door, my husband already knew what to do. I'm Rebecca, and this is Amish Confessions, quiet stories from women who lived inside the silence and finally found the words. If anything in tonight's story sits close to your own life, stay with me. Subscribe so the next woman's voice reaches you too. And before I go further, tell me in the comments, what does silence sound like in your house? The room smelled like kerosene and the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. November had crept into the walls of our farmhouse the way it always did, slow, patient, certain. Outside, the wind moved through the bare maples behind the barn. Inside, the heater ticked. I lay very still. I was 29 years old. I had been married to Jacob for almost 7 years. We had 3 children sleeping down the hall, and that night, for the second time in my life, I was going to tell my husband I could not. I did not have words for what I was feeling. I only had the counting 1, 2, 3, 4. When I was 14, my mother taught me how to knead bread the way her mother had taught her. Her hands were the color of river stones, and her wedding band had worn thin where it touched her skin. She told me softly. The way she told me everything important. Gelassenheit is not only for God, Rebecca. It is for your husband too, yielding, letting go. Becoming soft enough that the world could press into you without breaking you. I nodded. I was 14. I did not know there was a difference between yielding to God and yielding to a man. I do not think she did either. I met Jacob at the Sunday singings the summer I turned 17. He was tall and quiet, and he did not laugh easily, which in our district was considered a kind of virtue. After the singing, he asked if he could drive me home in his courting buggy, and I said yes, because that is what you said. We sat side by side under the stars for 40 minutes without speaking. He was a good man. I want you to hear me when I say that. He was a good man who had been built by the same hands that built me, and neither of us understood yet how those hands had shaped us. Both things were true. The first year of our marriage was tender and confused. No one had told me anything, not my mother, not my older sisters, not the bishop's wife. Bundling in our courtship had its own quiet rules, the lines you did not cross, but the marriage bed was a country no one had drawn a map for. I learned what came next in pieces. Jacob learned in pieces too. We were 2 children pretending to be adults in the dark, and we never spoke about it in the daylight, not once. That silence was its own kind of marriage. It lived in the house with us. The first time I said no, I was 28. Our youngest was 6 months old and not sleeping. I had canned 42 jars of tomatoes that week. My hands were cracked. My back ached in a place I did not know could ache. Jacob came to me one night and I turned my face into the pillow and I said very quietly, "Not tonight, Jacob." He did not say anything. He lay down on his side of the quilt and he turned away. In the morning, he passed me the butter at breakfast like nothing had happened. I told myself it was fine. I told myself for months it was fine. But there had been something in his eyes that morning. Not anger, not hurt. Something more careful. Something like a ledger opening. And then there was the second night, November, the lantern burning low, his footsteps on the stairs. I heard him stop in the doorway. I did not turn my head. I said, "I am very tired, Jacob." He took one long breath in. He took one long breath out. He did not say a word. He lay down on his side of the quilt and he turned his back to me, and the quilt between us became a country wider than any I had ever known. The heater ticked. Somewhere down the hall, our middle child coughed in her sleep. Outside, something, a raccoon maybe, rustled behind the barn. And I lay there and I learned a thing my mother had never told me. Silence comes in 2 kinds. One kind rests you. The other kind counts, I thought. That night about my cousin Sarah. We had grown up 2 farms apart and she had married Eli the same spring I married Jacob. The summer before, at a quilting frolic at her mother's house, she had leaned close to me over the frame and said, almost without moving her lips, "Eli does not speak to me anymore. Not until I." And then she stopped. Someone had laughed across the room and she had pulled back and smiled and threaded her needle, and I had not understood. I was 28 and I had not understood. Lying in the dark beside my husband's turned back, I understood. Something in me went cold in a way the November wind could not reach. I thought about the bishop too. 2 winters before, he had preached a sermon on wifely submission, the verses we had heard since we were small girls. But there had been something added, a phrase about availability, folded in so softly you might have missed it if you weren't a woman with a body. And a marriage and a tired month behind you. I do not believe the bishop was a cruel man. I do not believe Jacob was a cruel man. I have come to believe slowly that cruelty is not always a person. Sometimes cruelty is a shape the community has been pouring its sons and daughters into for so long that no one remembers it was ever poured. Lying there, I wondered what tomorrow would bring. I wondered if Jacob would go to the barn and then to the mill and then, maybe, somewhere else. I did not know yet why the word maybe made my throat close. I did not know yet that on the third day, his coat would come home smelling like a kitchen that was not mine, and I did not know yet what I would see in Sarah's face the next time I found her. The phone shanty at the end of the road, but I would, and I would never forget it. The third day began the way every November morning began. Frost on the inside of the windows, coffee on the wood stove, 3 children at the long table, hair still warm from sleep. Jacob came down dressed for the mill and he ate quickly and he did not look at me. Not once. He passed his plate back with food still on it. He kissed the top of our oldest boy's head and not the others. He took his coat from the peg, and he left through the kitchen door without saying I. We'll see you at supper. The door closed softly. It closed softly. And I stood at the sink with my hands in the warm water, and I understood for the first time that what was happening between us was not an accident. It had a shape, it had been taught. I began to notice things I had not let myself notice before. The way Jacob had stopped reaching for my hand when we said grace. The way he had taken to sitting on the porch alone after supper, Ausbund open on his knee not singing. The way he did not say my name, he used to say it constantly, Rebecca the kettle, Rebecca the lamp. Now he asked the kettle and the lamp directly, as if I had become weather in the room. None of it was loud, none of it left a mark. That, I have come to believe, is the design. The first refusal earns the silence, the second refusal earns the concern, and concern in our world has a long memory. A week later he came home after dark. I asked him where he had been. He set his hat on the table and he said, I went to see Deacon Yoder. My heart did a strange small thing in my chest. I did not have to ask why. In our district, when a man visits the deacon in the evening, alone without his wife, there is usually only one reason, and a wife's willingness had a way of becoming a pastoral matter, quietly, without her in the room. I want to be careful here. I am only telling you what I lived, what I saw in my own community, but I will tell you this. After that visit, there was a softness in Jacob's voice that frightened me more than coldness had. He had brought home a script. He did not have to write it himself. That Saturday was Esther Miller's quilting frolic, 12 of us in her front room, the smell of cinnamon sticks and lamp oil, the soft chuckle of older women who had earned the right to laugh at things the rest of us only nodded at. Sarah was there. She was pale in the way bread gets pale before it bakes. She sat down beside me at the frame and she did not pick up a needle for a long time. I poured her tea. I did not speak. I had learned by then that some women need the thrust first before the words can find their way outside. The snow had started, that small, dry, ticking snow that sounds like rice on a window pane. We stitched, we waited. It was Sarah who spoke first, the way I knew she would. She told me in a voice you had to lean close to hear what had happened in her house. Eli had gone to her parents. Not to the deacon, to her parents. Her father had taken her aside at a Sunday meal and asked her, gently, if she was being a good wife. Then her grocery allowance had grown smaller, not by much, just enough to notice. Then in October, the Eli had gone alone to his cousin's wedding 3 districts over and left her at home with the children, and everyone had seen, and no one had said a word, and that, Sarah told me, was the worst part, that no one had said a word. She looked at me with eyes that had been crying for a long time without tears. Rebecca, she said, I did not sin. But they made a sinner out of me without ever saying the word. I went home that night and I began to see Jacob's small turnings the way you see. Footprints in fresh snow. The buggy needed a new wheel, there was no money. But the new harness came the following Tuesday. He did not take me to my sister's after church anymore. For the first time in 6 years, he stopped asking what I wanted from town. None of it was cruel, none of it was even unkind. That was the awful brilliant thing about it. There was no wound to point to. There was only a slow narrowing of the world, the way a room gets smaller when someone closes the curtains one by one and you do not notice until it dark, and I knew even then that for some men in our community the narrowing did not stop here. I had heard the older women whisper, I will not tell you what I have not seen with my own eyes. I will only say this, a man taught to treat refusal as injury will treat himself as owed. It was a Thursday in late January when the realization came. I was kneading bread again, the way my mother had taught me. The way her mother had taught her. The dough was warm under my hands. The kitchen smelled of yeast and wood smoke and the small, clean cold that came in through the seam under the back door, and I looked down at my hands. These hands that fed our children, that washed my mother-in-law's hair when she was sick, that had reached for Jacob 1,000 times in 7 years, and a sentence came up in me so. Quietly, I almost missed it. I was never taught that no was a sin, I was only taught that yes was a prayer. And the difference between those two things I understood for the first time was the whole of my life. I did not cry, I just kept kneading. The bread rose anyway. I want to say something true, and I want to say it carefully. I love the place I came from. I have loved the women who carried casseroles up our lane when our baby had fever. I have loved the way our neighbors arrive at first light to cut wood for a widow without being asked. I have loved the songs in the Ausbund, slow turning of seasons, the children running barefoot from porch to porch without fear the community made me. And the community kept some things from me. Both of those are true at the same time, and I have stopped trying to make them argue. If you have been listening to me tonight, maybe you know that already. Maybe in your own house there is a quiet you have been counting. I want to tell you something, you who are still awake at this hour. Every community has its Ordnung, written or unwritten, and every woman has the night when she learns her no is the beginning of someone else's arithmetic. You are not the only one. You were never the only one. The morning after I understood, I tied my prayer cap ribbons again. I made breakfast, I called the children. I laughed at something the youngest said about the cat. Jacob came in from the barn and I poured his coffee. And outside me nothing had changed. But inside me a small lantern had been lit, and it was mine, and no one in the world had to know it was burning. I had said no twice. And on the third night, for the first time in 29 years, I said yes to myself.